Good morning and welcome, friends. This is United Lodge of Theosophists, Washington, D.C. We meet at 11 a.m. every Sunday morning for the presentation of a particular topic by a student of Theosophy, which is followed by questions and answers. The Declaration. The policy of this lodge is independent devotion to the cause of Theosophy without professing attachment to any theosophical organization. It is loyal to the great founders of the Theosophical movement, but does not concern itself with dissensions or differences of individual opinion. The work it has on hand and the end it keeps in view are too absorbing and too lofty to leave it a time or inclination to take part in side issues. That work and that end is the dissemination of the fundamental principles of the philosophy of Theosophy and the exemplification in practice of those principles through a truer realization of the self, a profounder conviction of universal brotherhood. It holds that the unassailable basis for union among Theosophists, wherever and however situated, is similarity, aim, purpose, and teaching, and therefore has neither constitution, bylaws, nor officers, the sole bond between its associates being that basis, and it aims to disseminate this idea among Theosophists in the furtherance of unity. It regards as Theosophists all who are engaged in the true service of humanity without distinction of race, creed, sex, condition, or organization, and it welcomes to its association all those who are in accord with its declared purposes and who desire to fit themselves by study and otherwise to be the better able to help and teach others. The true Theosophist belongs to no cult or sect, yet belongs to each and all. The following is the form signed by associates of the United Lodge of Theosophists. Being in sympathy with the purposes of this lodge, as set forth in its declaration, I hereby record my desire to be enrolled as an associate, it being understood that such association calls for no obligation on my part, other than that which I myself determine. United Lodge of Theosophists, Washington, D.C. Will not have any talks presented in the month of August. We will return the first week in September. We will continue our discussions on Zoom, and we are studying the ocean of Theosophy as a round table during this period. If you wish to join us, please let us know so that we can extend an invitation to you, because this round table gathering is by invitation only. Today's reading comes from the voice of the silence. Saith the people, O teacher, what shall I do to reach to wisdom? O wise one, what to gain perfection? Search for the paths. But O Lanu, be of clean heart before thou startest on thy journey. Before thou takest that first step, learn to discern the real from the false, the ever fleeting from the everlasting. Learn above all to separate head learning from soul wisdom, the eye from the heart doctrine. Yea, ignorance is like unto a closed and airless vessel, the soul a bird shut up within. It warbles not, nor can it stir a feather, but the songster mute and torpid sits, and of exhaustion dies. But even ignorance is better than head learning, with no soul wisdom to illuminate and guide it. The seeds of wisdom cannot sprout and grow in airless space. To live and reap experience, the mind needs breadth and depth, and points to draw it towards the diamond soul. Seek not those points in Maya's realm, but soar beyond illusions. Search the eternal and the changeless Sat, mistrusting fancy's false suggestions. For mind is like a mirror. It gathers dust while it reflects. It needs the gentle breezes of soul wisdom to brush away the dust of our illusions. Seek, O beginner, to blend thy mind and soul. Shun ignorance, and likewise shun illusion. Avert thy face from world deceptions. Mistrust thy senses. They are false. But within thy body, the shrine of thy sensations, seek in the impersonal for the eternal man. And having sought him out, look inward. Thou art Buddha. Shun praise, O devotee. Praise leads to self-delusion. Thy body is not self. Thy self is in itself without a body, and either praise or blame affects it not. Self-gratulation, O disciple, is like unto a lofty tower, up which a haughty fool has climbed. Thereon he sits in prideful solitude and unperceived by any but himself. False learning is rejected by the wise and scattered to the winds by the good law. Its wheel revolves for all, the humble and the proud. The doctrine of the eye is for the crowd, the doctrine of the heart for the elect. The first repeat in pride, behold, I know. The last, they who in humbleness have garnered, lo, confess. Thus have I heard. Today's talk, Practical Theosophy.
Thank you, friends. In pronouncements from the great masters of wisdom, it is reiterated that the great mission of Theosophy is to bring an intelligent appreciation of the great problems of life, so that the whole status of humanity may be raised to a higher stature. H.P. Blavatsky's Key to Theosophy, in addressing practical theosophy and duty, has the Theosophist telling the inquirer that rebirths are necessary because the final goal cannot be reached anyway but through life experiences. The object of doing our duties to all men and to ourselves the last is not the attainment of personal happiness, but of the happiness of others. The fulfillment of right for the sake of right, not for what it might bring to us. Happiness, or rather contentment, may indeed follow the performance of duty, but it is not and must not be the motive for it. Duty is that which is due to humanity, to our fellow men, our neighbors, our family, and especially that which we owe to all those who are poorer and more helpless than we are ourselves. This is a debt which, if left unpaid during life, leaves us spiritually insolvent and moral bankrupts in our next incarnation. The key goes on to state that Theosophy is the quintessence of duty. It says our duty is to drink without a murmur to the last drop whatever contents the cup of life may have in store for us, to pluck the roses of life only for the fragrance they may shed on others, and to be ourselves content with the thorns, if that fragrance cannot be enjoyed without depriving someone else of it. And no theosophist has the right to this name unless he is thoroughly imbued with the correctness of, say it again, Carlyle's truism, quote, "The end of man is an action and not a thought, though it were the noblest," close quote. And unless he sets and models his daily life upon this truth. Despite what was just said, and all the other enlightenment and the path to freedom as pointed out in the Theosophical movement, this movement is often ignored by the masses, considered to be very impractical, and students of our theosophy of very little value to the world at large. What good, they say, is it to talk about the law of karma, of reincarnation and cycles, about metaphysical things, when surrounding each one of us is pain, ignorance, anguish, and suffering? So those who find these teachings must first understand how we can make them of practical value to humanity and everyday life and work. The first great thing to learn is that working with effects of suffering while failing to remove the very root cause brings repeating anguish over and over again, and that under the great law of cause and effect, only working with one of the pair produces but partial results. Also, the presence of a weakness is indicative of the fact that we have within ourselves the power to overcome that particular weakness or fault. Once we have seen the real cause of the suffering, of the anguish and pain of our fellow men, it is also possible for us to find out how we can successfully help those fellow men to overcome their very weaknesses and disabilities. Would-be companions of the one great lodge of the Masters of Wisdom must seek out our own inner master, which links us to the great lodge, and work with the masters as one will, one heart, one energy, in applying the true and practical principles of Theosophy. Recognizing the supreme fact that we have produced effects out of our own weaknesses, we also have within ourselves the power to overcome them. Which brings us to the fact that 3. All our weaknesses are but stepping stones to our own growth and progress. All legislation, all social reform, all help to individuals or bodies of individuals go for naught unless we overcome our own weaknesses and enable others to overcome theirs by right appreciation of the difficulties, their origin, genesis, cause, evolution, and ultimate goal and end, and the purpose, aim, and object which underlie. So no system will transform itself into a wonderful being, an energetic entity which would solve not only its own problems and difficulties, but help the solution of the problems of the human race as a whole. A theosophical education already offers the way toward this end, yet we keep searching for all sorts of panaceas. When Theosophists begin to examine why it is that political and social reforms are not able to remove the ill effects of ignorance and suffering, we find it is because the reformers deal with effects all the time, like the modern science of medicine. Instead of going to the root cause of the trouble, which is within each one of us, the reformers all go to removing the effects. The cause remaining, it produces in due course and in due season the same evil effects, which persist consistently and constantly, and the problem remains unsolved. There is a great deal of truth in the assertion that superstition will naturally die as education becomes universal. Yet when we see countries where so-called education is lacking and compare their state with that of countries where there is better education, we still do not find that the spread of education has enabled men to become more noble in the sense that they are more intelligent to cope with the inner problems of their own life. No doubt they have taken a great step forward with more education, but our understanding of human problems, our limitations, and our weaknesses have still remained the same, even with all our Sunday schools and other education opportunities. When Theosophists go back to the lessons of history, we find a consistent course marked out by the great Theosophist in every age, the same course which HPB marked out for us to follow in an efficient and practical manner. Yet today's reformers continue to ignore not only the wisdom of the ages and the science of the soul brought out in occultism and theosophy, but also ordinary common sense. Although a veil may fall on the future, who prevents us from studying the past? Human events, historical events, come back over and over again in the same kind of an order and procession. If that be so, if our reformers would throw their minds back instead of trying to visualize in the future, they would come to sure knowledge, not only of theosophy, but of practical occultism. A major difficulty is that we see the great truths and tenets of theosophy outside of us. We make a division between the sacred, which we regard as theosophy, and the secular, which we regard as non-theosophy. We make a division so intense that we are not able to give that helping hand, to give that little guidance, which, as true students of theosophy, we ought to give, and which from us the world is entitled to expect. We ought to understand how we can make use of the great teachings of our philosophy in the everyday affairs of life. In order to do this, we must make our own mind clear as to what we are doing and assimilate these teachings. Otherwise, what good is it to hear and repeat hundreds of times this great teaching of reincarnation, of karma, about the one life, the law of cycles, and all the rest of it? We must learn to apply the teachings first in our own daily life, that we are able to see for ourselves before we can show it to others. That we have grown, that our perception is widening, that our views of life have deepened and become more spiritual. We ought to make a clear and definite picture in our own minds of not what the duty of somebody else is, but what our own duty is. Nobody was ever able to better his own life or help better the conditions of his neighbors without the right kind of study. One of the great things of practical and beneficent value we have to contribute to the world is this idea: you cannot be good, you will not be able to live a noble life without studying the first principles which indicate to you what are the laws of nature, what are the laws of human growth, where nature is leading us through that growth. That it is our duty to love our fellow man. No one questions the proposition that it is noble for the human heart to sacrifice itself in the interest of others. Why is it we're not able to do it? Why is it that the world is in general not able to cope with it? Are all these people insane? Are they all selfish? No, it's that they are not able to do better. They will not be able to practice brotherhood. They will not be able to sacrifice themselves in the interest of their fellow man without a proper metaphysical and philosophical basis and adequate understanding of the great laws of nature and of being. The study of the great propositions of theosophy lies in the application, each for himself, in the daily struggle of life, so that we know what we are doing from day to day. The deliberative living of the life, the strenuous living of the life, with a definite goal and objective before us. The goal and objective towards which we are steadily marching. That is what the world is needing, but they will only get it when the few are beginning to live it all the time. HPB dedicated the voice of the silence to the few. Number 6, the practical work of the Theosophist is to live Theosophy. The living of the life is essential for the growth of humanity. It is one thing for an individual to try to live a healthy life because he does not want to pay the doctor's bill or to feel the pains and aches of the body. That, noble as it is not spiritual. But that attitude, quote, I owe a duty to humanity, a civic obligation, a sacred duty on my part to have bodily health. So through my health, the whole statute and status of health in my city improves, close quote. That is the idea, that is the goal, which we ought to incorporate in our being. Further, get the same idea in reference to what we call our mental, moral, and our spiritual evolution. To recognize the fact that our spiritual growth is a high kind of selfishness if it is undertaken on one's own behalf. But that to live the spiritual life for the alleviation of non-spiritual defects so that the world may become better and holier because of our defects endeavors, then applied in a practical way will make every organism of students of Theosophy like unto a mighty lighthouse in this vast ocean of earthly existence. And that is a practical way to apply Theosophy. And suppose that we begin to live like that, what would be the effect? The first effect would be that we would notice the change in our own inner constitution to such an extent that a new confidence born of knowledge would come to us. Most of us believe in the soul, but when we come to analyze our actions in daily life, how many begin to live like souls? Some amongst us live like minds and as minds. Most amongst us live as and for the body. Very few live as divine, immortal souls, because we fail constantly to consult our own spiritual consciousness and to consult our own inner self. So number 7, consult the inner immortal ruler is the most practical action that any practical man may take in everyday affairs of life. To practice theosophy and make theosophy practical, the individual must begin with himself. When he has done this, he will find what the difficulties and obstacles are that stand in the way of humanity. All the time, we are trying to help our fellow man when we do not know what ails them, what it is that they are suffering from, and how they can overcome their difficulties. As we have not overcome those same difficulties in us, therefore we are not able to point out the way of mastery over them. The most practical aspect of theosophy is missing because our teachings get disassociated from practical things. First, number 8. We need the intellectual appreciation of spiritual facts, then spiritual realization in one's own life of those facts. How do we view children? As bodies, as minds, or as souls? As something fundamentally spiritual, however obscure and hidden, or as something different from the spiritual, unfolding, divine immortality, that immortal entity that is. How do we look at people we call criminals? Do we try to see that which is the heroic and noble man inside? For there it is that our help to our fellow men comes. To see the hidden God in others, because we have asserted our own self-confidence in the God within us. And to forget the weaknesses, the limitations, the sinful nature of our fellow men. To see how through their errors, through their limitations, the hero is fighting, perhaps not recognizing that he is carrying on a spiritual warfare. To see the spiritual human beings, to see the hero locked up inside the prison house of flesh, to see the great, mighty activity in all our fellow man, and perceive what aspect of theosophy is coming out in expression in the life activity of every single being. So the world of the spirit, the world of soul, the world of the divine, immortal ego, is the world of theosophy. And it is for us to raise our perception in terms of our knowledge to that world and see the Theosophist that is gradually unfolding in each single human being. To enable him to take the next step in advance, to show him the grandeur and the glory and spirituality of his very deformities and suffering. That is the practical aspect of theosophy that comes to us when we have studied the great propositions and applied them in some measure to our own daily struggles. That unfolds the power of compassion. The power of compassion is that power of discernment, that power of discrimination, the power to judge aright, the power to see better the activities of immortal man and the weaknesses in and through which that immortality and divinity is fighting its way out to expression in glory and in grandeur. That is a practical aspect of theosophy. To see the great Buddha light that is in the heart of every single creature, to watch for its expression, beautiful sometimes, ugly apparently in its expression at others, but behind that ugliness, the light still. To enable the man to understand not what we call theosophy, but what to him are the great perceptible energies and forces of his own existence. That is a task which every student of theosophy has to undertake. Millions of our fellow men will not come to an intellectual study of our philosophy, nor will they understand theosophy in the sense we understand it. It is a path of the few, and always has been, and always will be. But the work of the few is to see the spiritual energies that are throbbing in the hearts of all those millions of human beings, and with courage, with compassion, with strength, with faith, and with humility, to lead people along so they may stand on their own feet and fight their own battles, each in his own sphere of life. To see the hidden springs of this one spiritual consciousness which sits in the heart of every single human being, and to find out the spiritual hero and warrior in each one, fighting his own battle of ignorance, fighting his own sinful nature as each one of us is fighting ours. That is the task which will bring us the power of illumination from within. Not only bring us peace and consolation, but the strength, the compassion, which will enable us to see that we are but parts of nature, that in us too Mother Nature is working in a subtle, hidden, mysterious way, fulfilling the great law of compassion, the great law of universal brotherhood. And thus we become a brother to all strivers, to all those who struggle. To become a brother who tries to live the life of brotherhood in the spiritual sense, who tries to see the universal law of brotherhood operating in nature from within, without, each in his own place, to understand the spiritual meaning of the ordinary events of life, the everyday struggle of existence, to see the inwardness of it all. That will bring us the power to help others, because we have begun to understand their difficulties, their weaknesses, their limitations. And just as in the case of a physical accident to the body, a man who does not know the first principles of first aid loses his head and is of no value. So also in the case of spiritual danger, we become useless because we lack the spiritual knowledge grounded in an application of Isis Unveiled and the great fundamental propositions of the secret doctrine of the law of reincarnation, karma, cycles, and of the spirit of the supreme fact that behind every sinner is hidden the saint, behind every savage is a sage obscure, behind every weak man is a spiritual soldier trying to come to birth, to see all the events of our life, to see all the happenings of other people's lives from the spiritual point of view, is to gain for ourselves a perception of the occult science. We have to see in every action of our daily existence a spiritual message, a symbol and emblem of something that is mystical, esoteric, occult, and simple and self-evident in their truthfulness. Those mysteries become a jargon when not applied to life, but in their application they become simple, self-evident truths, because they shine out not from the intelligent mind, but from the intelligent, illuminated heart. Though we do not open our lips, though we walk silent among our brothers, that practical aspect of theosophy, to live as souls in the brotherhood of souls, to recognize the hidden power in each man, to give the silent inspiration that flows from us because we have overcome our weaknesses, that brings us to the attention of those holy masters who lift us from the world of the mortal, unveiling to us the glories of the world of the immortal, to pass out from the unreal to the real, from darkness into light, that is transforming this world into a world that is happy, not as ordinary humanity regards happiness, but happy in the sense of it always progressing, noting the onward march, not of human bodies, but human souls, we emerge triumphant, not by the power of some outside God, but by the power of the inner immortal ruler within ourselves. Thank you for listening.